let's talk about the Cold War. More specifically, let's talk about France's involvement in the Cold War. When we think of the 50s and 60s, we don't really think of anything but the Cold War. It's basically a dominating event, and in my opinion, one of the most overrated events. However, this doesn't mean it's not historically important. A lot of advances were made in the Cold War, and most significantly, we had the space race, resulting in man on the moon, obviously. But there's also the nuclear arms race between the US and the USSR. This was probably the crown jewel of this time. But when we think of nuclear, let's talk about nuclear weapons. When we think about nuclear weapons, we think of the US, USSR, obviously, maybe Iran, and thanks to George Bush, we think about Iraq. But I digress. We don't think about France, and we should think about France because France also embarked on a nuclear program in the late 1950s. They did, and people don't realize this, but you're gonna laugh. They first detonated on February 13th, 1960, the Gerbois Bleu, or Blue Gerbil, at Regan, Algeria. And no, this is true. The Blue Gerbil, and you could think of it as a wimpy bomb, but it had a high yield of 60 to 70 kilotons. No other nuclear power has dropped as powerful a bomb on its first test. And they continued with their program, first thermonuclear device on August 24th, 1968. This had 2.6 megatons dropped at the Fangatofa Atoll. Probably just blew this place out of the water. And they continued their testing 6 more years up until 1974. They stopped, resumed again to protest in 1995, and they have now signed the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They do, however, remain the third most powerful nuclear nation in the world. So, no joke there. But let's get back to the Cold War, back to the beginning. Obviously, France had fought in the Great War, lost 1.5 million, and they again fought in the Second World War, actually lost their entire country. Fortunately, they found it again. It was lost and found it again, got it back. And so they're pretty devastated by this point. 2 big wars in 1 century, in 1/2 century, and they were terrified of Germany. They wanted Germany gone. They wanted Germany to have no power. Understandable, seeing as how Germany had destroyed them twice. Unfortunately, on the other end of the spectrum, Americans wanted to increase Germany's power, and this was awkward for France because the Americans sort of got what they wanted at this time. For example, or I should say that France, they didn't know what to do because they were like between a rock and a hard place. And for example, Badeau met with the U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall in April 1947 and laid out the problem very bluntly. To the American question, he said, or to the American question, can we rely on France? He said to Marshall, the answer is yes, but France needs time and must avoid a civil war. So things were serious. The hatred of Germany was so strong in juxtaposition to the need to appease America. So what were they to do? They were worried that central government Germany would eventually be dominated by the Russians. So they needed to find a solution. France wanted Germany to be powerless, but if they could not have that, they wanted communist Russia out of West Germany. And the best way for this to occur would be to have a strong Western influence in Western Germany, to keep the communists out. So therefore, France gradually grew to accept and later praise the plan of a divided Germany, East and West. This effectively solved both the German and the Russian problem. In this way, France allowed Europe to develop much more rapidly than if they had met the British and US division proposition of barriers in general defensive politics. So, for once, the system is actually working in our favor. And, you know, like, people say, okay, well, this is Eisenhower's idea, so what does France have to do with it? Well, actually, what they don't understand is that Eisenhower wanted an entirely different plan. And I won't get into the semantics of it, but basically, France, I shouldn't say president, because he was not the president. let me see if I can remember this here. The president of the Council of Ministers at the time, this would be the president or prime minister for France, was Mendès France, somehow same last name. He reworked the policies more to his liking, and he basically told the Americans, listen, you're coming to my country, you're dealing with my neighbor, you're going to do it my way, I guess, or the Autobahn, as they say, my way or the Autobahn. And so France had an active role in the development of Western Germany policy, and they actually were the ones who liberalized the occupation regime, which is fortunate because a conservative Germany has had some problems in the past. So basically, Mendès France, in his strong diplomatic notions, managed to avoid an isolated France and neutralize Germany and Soviet domination of Europe, which would have been guaranteed if they had taken Germany. Basically, in conclusion, without France, we would have had a Soviet Germany, because there'd be no anchor for all of them to hide behind, and the Americans wouldn't have had their foot in the ground. And so basically, France is still the best, as usual. And yeah, I think that's all the time I have for today, Tom.
Okay, welcome to Cage.